Terlingua, Texas, an outpost in the desert where silence feels wide. From a distance, the ruins look like they grew out of the rock. Long ago, Terlingua lived by quicksilver mercury drawn from desert stone. Work, heat, and hard routines shaped a town in the middle of nowhere. Today, the buildings stand open to the sky walls without roofs, doorways without doors. The desert keeps what it wants and leaves the rest as sculpture. When night arrives, Terlingua becomes a different world. Quiet markers, desert air, and a sky so bright it feels close enough to touch. Getting to Terlingua is part of the story miles of desert road, open sky, and the feeling that the map is thinning out. This desert once drew people for quicksilver mercury, extracted from cinnabar. Heat, stone, and patience turned ore into liquid metal. Now, the town is mostly sky, and walls doorways that frame the desert like windows. The ruins feel less like leftovers, and more like sculpture. Terlingua didn't vanish, it transformed. Today it's a place people visit to gather, tell stories, and celebrate the desert in their own way. Behind these hills are the remnants of work that once drew people here. A mine entrance is just a hole in stone until you imagine the lives it shaped. Mercury mining was a desert test: heat, dust, and relentless routine. It wasn't just about metal, it was about endurance. In daylight, the cemetery feels humble and personal, simple markers facing a sky that never ends. A quiet record of a tough place. Down by the river, the desert feels even bigger. Terlingua sits near a natural boundary where the landscape itself draws the lines. One of Terlingua's most iconic shapes is a doorway to the sky, an old church ruin that turns empty space into architecture. The desert sun paints everything, especially adobe. Every crack becomes a line, every shadow a reminder that time works differently here. Mining towns ran on essentials: food, tools, water, and supplies. A simple store could feel like the center of the entire world. At night, the ruins disappear into shadow, and the sky becomes the main event. Terlingua is a place where darkness reveals more. Beneath the dust, the desert hides color ore that once pulled an industry out of stone. In Terlingua, geology was destiny. The retort was the heart of the operation, heat transforming rock into liquid metal. A delicate process in a rough environment. Here, the wind is a resident. It moves through doorways, climbs broken walls, and turns the town into a quiet instrument. Terlingua isn't only a place that was, it's a place people return to, for the quiet, the sky, and the feeling of being far from everything. In Terlingua, even rust becomes art. Desert light turns scrap into geometry-sharp edges, long shadows, and stories without words. Mining towns were built fast and practical rows of small homes, shared routines, and a life organized around the workday. These storefronts once meant supplies, conversation, and news. Now they're frames holding only air, light, and the outline of daily life. Out here, the horizon feels like a border of its own mountains, river, and open air. Terlingua sits close to that edge. Some markers here are painted bright color against desert stone. Even in a quiet place, people leave a personal signature. Terlingua's ruins act like camera frames. A missing window becomes the perfect viewfinder for the desert beyond. In the hottest hours, shade becomes everything. A porch, a chair, and a breeze, small comforts in a massive landscape. Dusk arrives fast in the desert. The sky darkens, the air cools, and the first stars show up before you're ready. This is where the town's purpose once lived. Heat, machinery, and process. Now it's quiet, but the layout still tells you what happened here. Out here, people build beauty from leftovers. Terlingua's creativity feels handmade, part survival, part celebration of the desert. The landscape around Terlingua is the real monument: canyons, ridges, and distance that makes everything feel small and honest. In Terlingua, a lantern can feel like a lighthouse. One small light, surrounded by miles of darkness, and a sky that never stops. Dust collects on every step, like a soft archive. Even the entrance to a building becomes a record of wind and time. Even simple roadside details feel cinematic here. A mailbox, a fence line, and mountains that look painted onto the horizon. Some rooms have no roof, no doors, only outlines. A kitchen without walls, open to the desert like it was always meant to be. Once a year, the desert gets loud in the best way. Food, music, and stories turn Terlingua into a gathering place under the stars. Morning here feels clean and endless. The desert wakes up slowly, light first, then color, then the sense of distance. In the desert, water is infrastructure. A tank like this isn't just metal, it's survival, planning, and routine. Tools are the most honest artifacts. They show the work directly, weight, wear, and the repetition that built a town out of rock. Every doorway here leads to the same place, the desert. Terlingua feels like architecture designed to frame a landscape. At noon, the desert turns graphic hard light, hard shadows. The ruins become a map of angles drawn by the sun. Terlingua has a way of gathering people, one small patio, a few lights, and a sky so wide it feels like the ceiling is gone. Near the canyon, the air feels different, cooler, deeper, quieter. The landscape changes the mood in a single step. When the lights come on, the desert feels intimate. One window glow can turn miles of darkness into something welcoming. Growing anything here takes intention. A small garden in Terlingua feels like a quiet victory over heat and distance. Some buildings still dominate the horizon. In silhouette, they look monumental, like the desert kept the outline and removed the rest. Every step here makes a sound: gravel, dust, and quiet. Terlingua is a place you experience with your feet as much as your eyes. When you watch the stars move, time feels different. Terlingua turns the sky into a slow river of light. In the morning, the ruins feel gentle. Light slides over broken walls like it's restoring them without touching a single brick. Terlingua teaches by standing still. Visitors learn the story in fragments, rock, heat, and the idea that a town can change its purpose. Here, color doesn't compete with decay, it complements it. Terlingua's palette is rust, sky, and whatever people choose to paint. In Terlingua, the view does something to your brain. Distance resets your sense of time and makes everything feel simpler. In Terlingua, a doorway can outlive the house. A frame in open air still pointing to where daily life used to begin. Close up, the town becomes a texture study. Wood grain, adobe cracks, and dust that settles like a soft final layer. After rain, the desert looks newly painted: darker rocks, brighter air, and small mirrors on the ground that vanish by afternoon. Firelight changes everything. In the desert night, a campfire becomes a small circle of warmth surrounded by endless sky. Some roads here still feel like work roads. Dusty tracks that once led to mines, now leading into quiet landscape. Even without roofs, these buildings keep their silhouettes. A broken roofline can still draw a clean line across the sky. From the canyon rim, the river looks small, but it changes everything. Water and rock carve the borderlands into a masterpiece. Terlingua invites you to pause. One chair, one horizon, and enough quiet to hear your own thoughts. At night, even the smallest street feels like a scene. Warm lights, dark desert, and a sky that keeps expanding. Out here, directions feel personal, handmade signs and improvised markers. The desert doesn't need much to guide you. Terlingua runs on hands-on creativity. Small workshops where people repair, build, and make the desert feel livable. When storms arrive, the desert becomes theater clouds, light, and dust, shifting the entire mood in minutes. Mornings here are simple. Shade, a warm drink, and the desert slowly brightening outside the door. Even broken glass becomes beautiful here, small pieces catching light like desert jewels. At sunset, the cemetery feels peaceful: colors, shadows, and quiet arranged on a hillside facing the sky. Pull back, and you see the real context. Terlingua is tiny, surrounded by miles of desert that make every structure feel precious. Even in a remote place, daily life has its rituals: doors opening, coffee brewing, and people drifting in from the desert road. The desert has its own soundtrack: wind, space, and tiny sounds that feel amplified because everything else is quiet. A single corner of adobe can look like a painting light, shadow, and a small plant insisting on life. And then the sky returns stars so bright they feel close. Terlingua makes you look up every single night. Terlingua's style is desert-made bones, paint, and handmade objects, turning the landscape into a gallery. Inside the ruins, light does the decorating. Sunbeams and dust turn empty rooms into atmosphere. Even a tiny market table can feel like a community center, handmade goods, stories shared, and a reason to stop and talk. Sunset here feels like a daily ceremony, light sliding off the mountains and leaving the desert in calm silence. In the desert, one light can define an entire street. A small glow becomes a landmark in the dark. From a hill, you see how small Terlingua is. That scale is part of its magic, human life, surrounded by vast space. Old photos remind you what the town looked like when it worked. New visitors arrive for the ruins and leave with a feeling. At midnight, Terlingua feels infinite. The land goes dark, and the sky becomes the only architecture. Terlingua began as a work town built around extraction and process. When the work slowed, the desert kept the structures as evidence. Now the town's economy is different. Terlingua reinvented itself as a place of travel, art, and desert nights. Near the borderlands, perspective changes. The landscape is so vast it makes human stories feel both small and unforgettable. In a dark desert, warmth looks like a window light. Terlingua turns isolation into intimacy, one glow at a time. In places like this, dust becomes visible. Tiny particles turning light into something you can almost touch. A key turning is a simple sound, but it means someone is here. Presence, routine, and a reason to keep going. Terlingua runs on desert time, slower, wider, and calmer. You don't rush it, you match it. Terlingua is more than a location. It becomes a feeling, quiet, space, and the kind of beauty you only find far from everything. From above, Terlingua is a few lights in a sea of darkness. And above that, an infinite sky that makes everything feel honest. The town changed, the work ended, the buildings opened to the sky, but the desert kept the story written in light, dust, and silence.